The fourth strategy is the Canary deployment strategy. So if we go into this one, it says Canary deployments involve releasing the new version to a small subset of users before rolling it out to the entire user base. So let's think about, say, we're implementing a new feature and this feature is going to be implemented across the site. So similar to the blue green where we want to test it out and so on, but what we could do is we could test it out on, say, 10% of our user base, or maybe 20% and so on. And again, this helps identify issues early without affecting all the users. So the stable release will always be there. But again, the Canary deployment strategy can test a subset of our users and then make sure there's no issues or anything going on in this deployment. So the pros for this are it risks mitigation. So it limits exposure to new version issues because we've only contained it to the X percentage of users that we have defined. And also it's a gradual rollout, which means that it's easier to monitor, control the deployment process. So these are things that are good in this strategy. So cons, again, complexity because it requires additional setup for monitoring and traffic splitting, which is of course a byproduct of this, because what we are doing is we are making sure our application or web app is resilient and secure at all times. And then also the cons is that it's delayed feedback. So if you want to get full user feedback and not a subset of the feedback, then that will take longer. So you could kind of do a Canary deployment strategy where you slowly increment the percentage of users. So you could do 10%, if that's fine, then 20 and 30 and so on. So again, this strategy is making sure that the live environment is somewhat contained and there's still that as a fallback. So that is the fourth strategy. And then you can see here, this is how we would implement. So let's go ahead and apply that in our deployment strategy. So first of all, let me just quickly go back into my cluster. Let me just quickly delete these two as well. And let's delete that. So these are deleting the deployments. And now let's go in our browser in our VS Code and let's clear this out. So as you can imagine, we probably do need a YAML file again. So this time we will have the Canary base YAML file. So let's create a new file, and this is going to be called canary-base.yaml, like this, or Canary base deployment actually, and these will be available in the repository anyway. So let me just paste this in. Again, instead of example, it's going to be named Canary. So let me just do Canary, add in the missing properties, and actually I'll just rename this to just base deployment. So that's our base deployment. And then we want our Canary deployment. So let me create a new YAML file, canary-deployment.yaml. And let me just bring in the code for this one. So again, this is the Canary app deployment. So Canary app deployment container. And again, let's just bring in the resource, just limiting and keeping costs down. So paste that in. So now with kubectl, we just need to apply the deployment. So let me paste that in. And then all we need to do next is add a service route again to route the traffic. So we already have that. So what we can do is pretty much reuse that. So let me just reuse that command. So kubectl apply service route.yaml. So we can use that one again. So now you can see it says blue green service configured. That's not what we want. So what we'll do actually is create the new service route for the Canary deployment. So let me just do in the top level. It's going to be, the name is service.yaml or canary service.yaml like this. Paste this in, and then this time it's the Canary service. So let me save that, and then basically it's going to be kubectl apply, and this time we are applying the service canary.yaml like that, and press enter. And now you can see it says the service is created. So now that that's done, we need to use something to create traffic splitting. So the way you would do that is use Istio. So let me just go in the browser, and what we need to do is install Istio. So Istio here, if we go into it, we need to install this in our machine. So what is Istio? Basically, it extends Kubernetes to establish a programmable application-aware network working with both Kubernetes traditional workloads. Istio brings standard universal traffic management. So that's what it essentially does. And these are some of the providers, and you can see here Azure is one of them. So now, if we go in our documentation, you can see on overview, and then you can see what is Istio and so on. But if you want to install it, This is all you would do. So you can install in certain ways in here. So let's see which way is the best. You can install with istio.ctl. So that's probably what the best one we need to use. So all we do is we need the CLI, so quick start instructions, or guy uses command line tool. So let's use that. So that's what Istio is. So let's go back in here in our deployment. We now need to create a new YAML file once again. This one is to do this traffic splitting. So essentially, let's create the file, which is going to be called istio.yaml, like that. And then all we need to do is paste in what's going to happen. So we're using the latest API version. This is a virtual service, and the service is going to be named as traffic splitting service, like that. So now let's save that. So now you can see here it says we want to have the base, so basically the base subset as 90%, and then the Canary service as 10%. So essentially 10% of our audience is going to see the Canary deployment over here. And then all you would do is basically paste in the command kubectl apply, and then the YAML file that we have. So that is basically the istio YAML file that we have. So let's press enter, and that shows an error. So essentially I should rename this actually to traffic splitting service.yaml instead. Right, so now that you've created this YAML file, what you also need to do is install Istio, do the relevant configurations, and then from there, you essentially would apply what we've been doing before. So kubectl apply-f, and then this YAML file over here. This will then do the configurations for you and make your relevant deployment. So splitting it from 90 to 10. The point being that this is one of the deployment strategies that you could have, but in my opinion, I would generally prefer a feature flag, which is something I will do in the next video. But essentially, that's what will happen. And if I just did a quick command of get the deployment, you can see here now we have our base deployment and the Canary deployment in here. So again, you can see there's a bit of a split there. We have three ready in the base and one for the Canary. Again, most of this stuff will be done in your cloud DevOps team, and they will have this all in place anyway. But this is just to show you that this is a deployment strategy. So all we need to do now is, if we go back in our understanding of deployment, that is the Canary deployment strategy covered. As you can see here, this is definitely complex because we need to install something else to do the traffic routing, configure the DNS, and so on. So again, you want to think about these things when it comes to creating a deployment strategy or using a certain deployment strategy.